Welcome. Glad to have everybody back with us today on Election Science Office Hours, a webinar and podcast hosted by the Lynn Center for Science, Society, and Policy, also known as the LCSSP here at Caltech, and moderated by me, Michael Alvarez. Our Election Science Office Hours archive now has over 30 episodes, which are listed on the Democracy and Elections section of the Lynn Center's website at lcssp.caltech.edu. They're on our YouTube channel and they're also on our Spotify and Apple Podcast playlist. In addition, make sure to follow the LCSSP on LinkedIn, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, in addition to YouTube for all the latest updates on our work. As you know, we're now, like we're going to talk about, we're in the midst of election season, so there's a lot of stuff that's going on. For those of you who are live, one last bit of housekeeping. If you have a question, please post it in the Q&A area on the Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer it as time allows. Now, today I am super excited. I've got Bob Page with me today. Bob is the Registrar of Voters in Orange County, California, which is the nation's fifth largest voting jurisdiction. Bob, it's great to have you here with us again.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Bob last appeared on Office Hours for our September 30th, 2024 episode, which actually I watched again just yesterday. Fascinating episode. So if you haven't seen that episode, and if you're as big a fan of Bob's work as I am, you should go back to the YouTube archives and check it out. As I said, Bob is the Registrar of Voters for Orange County, California. He was appointed to this position in March 2022. So it's been a few years.
I've done a full
But
cycle now.
yeah, that's exciting. Full cycle and counting. He's also treasurer and member of the board of directors for the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, and a member of the California Secretary of State's Voter Choice Act Task Force. Prior to joining Orange County, Bob worked for the San Bernardino County for more than 20 years in roles for the Board of Supervisors for the CEO and for Arrowhead Regional Medical Center, and also as the Register of Voters from 2018 to 2022. So he previously worked as a newspaper reporter, and we're not going to hold that against you, and as a university and nonprofit fundraiser. Bob grew up in Orange County, so he's obviously working back at home, and he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from Dartmouth College and a Master of Arts degree from the University of Southern California Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. So we'll get right into it. And again, Bob, welcome to Election Science Office Hours, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you again, Mike.
So I know you and your team are super busy. We were just talking right before we started about this massive Gantt chart that Bob, I think, has got in his office, which is kind of a super cool management tool that he's using. But I know you're super busy getting ready for the June 2nd primary here in California. And of course, our general election in California is just a few months after that. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. Uh, what are the biggest priorities that your team is working on in preparation for both the primary in June and also the general election in November?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I don't want to necessarily parry your question too much, but it's hard to say what's a priority in election because everything we do, right, when we administer
Everything's a
election
priority.
is a priority. We complete hundreds, if not thousands, of
Uh,
tasks when we conduct an election, following, mass number of procedure and checklists that we have. And obviously, we don't want to miss any of those steps.
right.
So I know you're asking for priorities, but we really have to focus on everything. And and that is something as minor as making sure we have enough supplies, right? So
Mhm.
for this election, we learned late after the candidate filing period that the Secretary of State had qualified 61 candidates for governor for this primary election,
Mhm.
which caused us to have to quickly shift planning on supplies. We had to order more ballot paper because rather than be able to print 11-inch long ballots, we now have to print 17-inch ballots just to fit that many candidates on three columns across the front side of the ballot because the
Mhm.
governor's race has to be the first contest, and we don't want to waste a front side of a ballot with only instructions and no election contests on it. So, that has created a ripple effect in terms of
Mhm.
of what we do. We are the only county in California that's certified to print and mail our ballots ourselves rather than using a
Mhm.
vendor. And so that 17-inch long ballot means that the speed at which the mail inserters that we use to cut, fold, insert ballots into envelopes is going to run about 33% to 50% of the speed it does when we're inserting 11-inch ballots. So we've had to, we started printing ballots and inserting a week earlier than we used to. We already actually started this week to insert ballots. We're now using 3 teams rather than 2, different working hours for those teams. So it's become a major change to address quickly once we learned we had that many candidates. We're obviously right now programming, testing every piece of equipment that we're going to use in this election. We're well into hiring and training a couple thousand temporary employees that we hire from the community for every election. We just are at the very tail end of securing the last of our 191 facilities for vote centers. We had to increase the number of ballot drop boxes from 124 to 128. The number of things that we need to do. We're obviously putting together the last touches on our voter education and outreach program. What our social media campaign is going to be. What are the key things that we need to remind voters about in this election? And one of those things that we need to remind them about is that the operating hours of our vote centers. This will be the first election where we will operate our vote centers for early voting from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. during those 10 days of early voting from May 23rd through June 1st. So that's a big part of our outreach and our voter education campaign this year.
Mhm. So let me just maybe rephrase the question too, though.
Yeah.
So like yesterday, today, what are the things that are occupying your time? I mean, what is it that you come in the office and you spend most of your time doing as you're getting ready for this next election cycle? I guess maybe it's talking to people like me, but
That's been a big part of it this week. I had KBC News Channel
uh-huh.
7 reporter in our office filming our training and interviewing me yesterday. I also did a presentation in Laguna Niguel last night for about an hour and a half to a community group. Later tonight, I'm doing a live interview for Spectrum One News
Right.
in their studio. So yeah, a lot of what I'm doing right now
Mhm.
is communicating and part of that voter education and outreach. But we meet as a team. We had a weekly meeting this morning where we went through all the different items that we need to be thinking about and updating each other, the different teams about, where things are. How many people have we hired so far? How many people have we put through training, which as of now, we've trained more than 500 people to work in our vote centers. So we're constantly in communication and making sure we don't miss any of those hundreds to thousands of steps we have to take.
Right. One of the things that I think is just so different about election administration today than it was when I first started meeting election officials over 20 years ago is this communication part. I think many election officials around 2000, 20 plus years ago, were perfectly content to like never talk to the news media if they didn't have to not get out in front of the public. And election administration, in some sense, was kind of seen as one of those functions of government that didn't get a lot of publicity.
Right.
Um, that's changed so dramatically. What do you do to prepare yourself for the amount of public facing communications that you have to do?
We've since I've been here in 22, we've continued to grow that program and keep adding to it. So we've got a good base for every
Mhm.
election in terms of things we do. We have a media toolkit that we put together for every election. We every
Mhm.
statewide election we do a online media briefing before ballots get mailed out. We're going to be doing that on April 29th. We have a media tour that we do the week before election day. We have been doing community open houses, which this year we'll
Mhm.
have that on from 4 to 7 p.m. on May 5th. We'll come in and be able to talk to our staff and we'll answer questions, make mini presentations about the different things
Mhm.
that we do to process ballots. But then we're looking for what's something additional we can do. What other information can we put out? How can we put it out? In the 2024 election, that kind of the last minute thing that we added was kind of adding a little bit more homemade video to show people the things that we do. So we did about
Mhm.
40 posts during that election that had video attached to them showing the different steps, security and ballot processing steps that we took. So We're really just every election we're thinking about what else we can do. I recently watched or listened to another podcast, and they interviewed a couple of professors from UC San Diego who talked about some studies they did about what communication
Mhm.
methods have the best impact, and they mentioned short vertical videos on social media.
Mhm.
So we're thinking about how could we marry the kind of show me videos we did in 2024 in that
Mhm.
format, rather than just filming staff working, having myself, make a quick, 20-second statement in front of people working to explaining what it is, rather than just writing out what they're doing. So we're constantly trying to come up with new ideas, but at the same time, I know I need to make sure I don't overburden my team with new ideas. So, it's a give and take and trying to figure out what we can get done in the amount of time that we have.
Mhm. And that's the work that Thad Kauser and his group's been doing, and that's their
Yeah.
podcast and their webinar. It's okay to say that, right? Uh, it's all, I think the work that Thad and his group are doing is pretty interesting. We're going to actually have them on as guests in a couple of weeks to
Okay.
talk about the work they're doing. So thanks for referencing that. And I love to hear that folks like you are listening to the work that the academic community is doing. No offense, it's like we do kind of esoteric stuff and we publish it in esoteric ways, but it's so exciting when people like that are doing work that is really impactful for what you're doing.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I know when I was in college, we kind of joked that in order to maintain tenure, you had to speak in at least three-syllable words. So,
Yeah. Well, that's what they teach us in grad school. They don't teach us how to do this kind of stuff in grad school. But so one of the things that's really important about the communications that you do and listening to your constituents is the election administration plan work that you do. And I know that your office recently issued the most recent election administration plan kind of before this cycle really began in December. This is part of the requirements of being a county that's participating in the Voter Choice Act process here in California. And the Voter Choice Act model is something that was implemented in Orange County before you took over. It offers voters, as you talked about, all this great flexibility and convenience in casting their ballots, like voting in vote centers. And I know that this election administration plan takes a lot of work. In particular, there's a lot of listening that goes on by you and members of your team. Can you talk about how you put together the process to develop this plan, what you learned, and what some of the key takeaways were?
yeah, sure. And thank you for that kind of overview. This was actually last year was the second time that we had reviewed and updated our election administration plan. The first plan was done in 2019, and then under the law had to be updated 2 years later in 2021. So my predecessor, Neil Kelly, led that process. This was going to be the first time that I got to be part of this process and working with the community and consulting with them on how we conduct elections. So you know, we really sat down as a team, and I told my team, look, I know there's minimum requirements in the law of what we have to do, but that's not going to be sufficient.
Mhm.
Given the cultural atmosphere we have right now around elections, just doing two 14-day online public comment periods and one public hearing was not going to be enough. We were going to get criticized if that's all we did, that we really weren't listening to the public. And so I really challenged my team to think outside the box of what we'd done before. How could we make sure that we heard from the widest variety of constituents and residents in Orange County that we could? We hired a consultant from the Institute for Local Government to come in and help us think through that and develop a plan for how we would do it. But the bottom line goal that I told my team was, we're going to have certain people who show up at the Board of Supervisors meetings every 2 weeks. They'll show up to the public hearing. They'll say the things that we know they're going to say, but we need
Mhm.
to make sure that they're not the only people that we're hearing from, that we're hearing from as many different voters as we can. So, we started by first, we've got three community advisory groups that we work with right, currently we've got a community election working group, which is a very, wide cross section of people. It's got party representatives, it's got city clerks, it's got language advocates, accessibility advocates. It's got to represent, we've got a couple of people who work in our vote centers that are on it to give us the feedback that and
Mhm.
somebody who represents the elderly community, student community. We've got a lot of different people who were on that body. We brought them. Plus, we have our language accessibility advisory committee and our voting accessibility advisory committee that we brought them all together in one room. They don't typically meet at the same time, but we brought them all together and we visioned, what are the key elements of the election administration plan that we want to get feedback from the community on. And so, we spent a couple hours with them and came up with a plan that we were going to ask voters about how we select our voting locations, about accessibility services, language access, how we secure elections, and how we plan for contingencies. And then
Mhm.
also that what you talked about before is how we educate and reach out to the voters in the community. So before we did a single, put pen to paper to draft a single word of the update for the plan, we invited about 200 community groups. We put together this list of people we worked with, other people that the counties worked with, other departments, obviously do a lot of community engagement. So we came up with a list of about 200 community groups that we invited to meet with us one-on-one. And in June, we started meeting with them. We held about 30 of those meetings that with different groups for about an hour. We also put together and planned 15 community workshops that we started in July. We had received criticism in prior updates that we hadn't done enough outreach to make sure people knew about it. So we did hundreds of social media posts. We did news release. We sent out emails to voters. We had email addresses we did phone calls. We sent people out into communities with flyers and talked to people in the street and told them about these workshops that we were doing so we could get people there. And so those 15 workshops are kind of broken down. We have 5 general workshops, one in each county supervisory district that were organized as an interactive open house type of model, where we had a station for each one of those 5 areas that I mentioned, plus there was a table for me. It was, designed to make sure that people could have meaningful dialogue. We kind of gave a textual, contextual overview of the process and what we were working on, how the open house was going to work, the workshop, and then just let people wander, through the room to the different stations and ask questions, provide feedback, write feedback on post-it notes and put it on a board. I ended up at my table getting a lot of people who don't like the Voters' Choice Act and would prefer if we went back to the polling place model. But, I knew I would need to have those discussions. So, we made sure that we had a meaningful dialogue with those people at those workshops. And it let the voters kind of go to the stations they wanted rather than sitting through an hour-long presentation about everything we do. So we felt that it was a good approach that we developed with our consultant. Then we also did a workshop in each one of the 9 languages at the time that we were required to serve, either from the Voting Rights Act or state law. The 4 that were for the Voting Rights Act languages, Section 203 languages, we actually presented in those languages.
Mhm.
The 5 state language workshops we did, we presented them in English, but we had interpreters available with headsets that people could use. And then we had an online workshop for voters with accessibility needs so that we could make
Mhm.
sure we address them as well. So, we felt like we got a lot of good input for that. And then we did the minimum requirement stuff. Once we did those small group meetings and we did the workshops, we then drafted an update to the election administration plan. And rather than giving voters only 14 days, we gave them 21 days to comment online to that draft EAP. And then that first public comment period then ended with a public hearing we held at Irvine City Hall. And then we took all that feedback, made revisions to the draft and posted it again for another 14 days for online review before we finalized it and sent it to the Secretary of State for approval. But
Mhm.
the great thing is that we essentially doubled the amount of public feedback we had received in prior
Mhm.
attempts to update the plan. We had more than 750 community comments that we received. Granted, again, a majority of the comments we received were people who don't support the Voters' Choice Act,
Mhm.
and were commenting about how they thought elections would be better if it was a one day of voting, polling places, that approach. But we received some good feedback, and the one thing that we really wanted to hear from people, and we got a lot of feedback on, was what are the best 8 hours a day for us to be open for early
Mhm.
voting? And so, in prior elections, we kind of had this 3-part. operational hour model where the first 7 days of early voting, we were open from 8 to 5. Then the next three, we were open from 8 to 8. And then had the statutory hours of 7 to 8 on election day. And we wanted to have 10 days of early voting with the same hours that would be easier for people to know. And
Mhm.
as a result, that's why our hours now are going to be 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. those 10 days because of that feedback that we received from voters, but also we looked at the data, all the elections that we held under the Voters' Choice Act starting in 2020, when were the most voters showing up by hour? And so we used that data as well to help us make that decision.
So that's a great process, and you learn some interesting things that maybe, I mean, that's just really counterintuitive to me
Yeah.
that necessarily you learn that the hours matter so much, but they clearly do.
Yeah.
That's all on your website, right? This report's on your
Yeah.
website. Okay, and so folks, if you're listening or watching this, you can go on the website and see the result of all of that work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Our website address is pretty simple to remember. It's ocvote.gov. And then the page for the election administration plan will be a slash EAP.
Yeah, I encourage folks to look at that because a lot of work went into it. And again, it's an important part of this communication process that we talked about, where there was all this listening that went on. You all distilled it and came out with, these really important action items for Orange County.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one specific thing that you mentioned, though, which is the language requirements, because I don't think. Well, I know a lot of people who watch this and listen to it are, election nerds like me, but many aren't. And I'm not sure that people understand just how complicated language requirements can be, nor do I think they understand just how complex um, the demographics are in Orange County. A lot of people I think of Orange County thinking about what it was like 20 or 30 years ago. It has
Yeah.
changed dramatically. That is not Orange County anymore. And one of the things, and we'll talk about this too, that I love about the partnership we have with you is I think Orange County is one of the most, if not the most, interesting, diverse, and exciting jurisdiction to be studying from my perspective. Now, you said that you're required right now under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act to provide support for 5 languages. Is that correct?
Well, English plus Chinese, Korean, Spanish, and Vietnamese.
Okay, Vietnamese. Okay. So then the California Elections Code requires that you provide reference ballots and to be posted in precincts in a number of other languages, which, according to my math, adds up to about 10 languages. Is that right?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned when we were doing the election administration plan, there are, you mentioned reference ballots, but as a Voters' Choice Act county, there's other things we have to do in those state
Okay.
languages as well. So we had to have a workshop for those languages. We had to translate the draft documents into, the four Voting Rights Act languages, and at the time, the 5 state languages we had. And so there's a lot of different work that we have to do. But with the state languages, they get updated. The Secretary of State, I think they use Cal Berkeley to help them with this. They will analyze the data every 4 years. They're
Mhm.
required by January 1 of the year that the governor is going to be elected, which is this year, to issue their new determinations. Um, they got it out a little bit early. They sent our language determinations out on Christmas Eve. Um, and we we had 5 languages before. We now have 8 state languages. 2 of the 5 that we had previously were no longer required to provide reference ballots or provide services in, and then we received 5 new. So that's how we ended up with 8. So state languages, we had and continue to have Farsi, Japanese, Tagalog. We were not no longer required to serve Gujarati and Hindi, but we were added Hmong, Indonesian, Khmer, Nepali, and Punjabi.
Wow.
So, there's obviously that's a lot of work. And when you think about it, okay, they gave us a week extra time, but it's still but
Right,
it's over
for
the
sure.
holidays, right? So,
Right.
it's a very tight timeline to be able to identify all the different things that you have to update and work on. Now that you have new languages, and under the Voters' Choice Act, we have to provide more than just reference ballots in those state languages. So,
Mhm.
one of the things that an example of something that we had to quickly, and we're just now starting to realize and implement it, is the ballot drop boxes that we install. We've got 128 now for this election. installed all over the county. There's certain instructional messages and warning messages that have to be translated on those. And when you
Mhm.
drop two and get five new ones, that meant we got to rewrap. We have to rewrap all of those drop boxes with new language and new messages. So we had to design that, figure out how to fit additional languages on those boxes. So we ended up probably spending more than $200,000 just to put new language onto all those drop boxes, which, as I said, just yesterday, our vendor started actually putting the new wraps onto the boxes so that every box will be wrapped by the time they're unlocked on May 4th. So, there's that, but then also there's a lot of signage that we have, informational signage that we have to have translated that are in our vote centers. So we've been spending a lot of time on redesigning and reprinting all those signs. And that's all stuff we
Mhm.
do in-house because we have our printing and graphics department. But it's still a lot of work we do. So there's that kind of initial thing, but then just generally regarding, ensuring that we're providing language services to all of our voters who prefer to be served in a language other than English. We
Mhm.
have, as I mentioned, we have our community language accessibility advisory committee that meets quarterly, that we meet with and talk about how we can best serve voters who prefer to vote and receive information in a language other than English. We, for the Section 203 Voting Rights Act languages that we have those for, we have a permanent staff member on our staff in each of those languages that's certified as
Mhm.
a translator, because we need to make sure everything we produce, whether it's on our website or mailed out to people, is translated into those languages. And so they provide a lot of that translation work, but because they are fluent in those languages, we also ask them during the year to be very active in those communities and help us build relationships, and better understand the needs of those communities. So they've kind of got a dual role that they fill year round. We also then have to contract with several translation firms to ensure that we can get everything that has to be translated in both federal and state languages done, because as you know, language
Mhm.
timelines are tight and you never get postponed, you never get additional time. So, we have to make sure that we're working with them. We hire additional temporary staff for every election to help proof and translate and serve voters in those communities. We also have to, as part of that, those people we hire, we try to make sure that we've got bilingual employees working in each of our votes. The vote centers where they're in communities that have a higher need for certain languages. We want to make sure that we have somebody who speaks English and their language in that vote center. But if because a voter can go to any vote center, they don't have to go to the one in their neighborhood that might have a language need. We have to make sure that if they go to another place, one of our vote centers that doesn't have a bilingual worker, that they still can get service. So,
Mhm.
for federal languages, we have a video chat service that we provide at vote centers if they need assistance where they can talk to somebody in our office. We also have a contractor that we hire to provide assistance over the phone if it's a language we don't have somebody working in our office to speak, as well as we can do video chat with an ASL interpreter for our voters. So, and then we've got a voter assistance hotline. We have to make sure we've got bilingual employees on those as well so that we can serve our voters. We have, obviously, with all this work and the timelines never get extended, but the work just keeps adding on top of us. We are looking at whether there's some artificial intelligence programs out there that might help us
Mhm.
be a little bit more efficient. So we've started to evaluate some AI programs that maybe could do initial translations for us,
Mhm.
rather than having our staff do it. But bottom line, it's going to have to be approved by, under the state law, we have to have a certified translator actually signing off on it. So we haven't quite found an AI program yet that does what we want it to do, or would,
Mhm.
or we may just have to realize that the amount of information we're going to have to feed to that AI to teach it
Yeah.
what we needed to know what is a little bit bigger of a project than we probably expected initially. Because we have, like, even for the translation firms that we use, we've developed a glossary of terms that, there are certain terms, technical terms, legal terms, that we want it translated a certain way. So we've developed that glossary, and that's something we would have to teach to AI that we already have to teach to our translation firms. So there's a lot of different things that we're looking at to try to make sure we're serving those voters.
At some point, I know that you don't have a lot of free time right now, or you probably won't until, maybe January, but we should circle back on that because I think that's actually an interesting thing that, on our end, on the research end, that we could explore as to really how to train and build those kind of models that might be useful
Okay.
for purposes like this.
I'm open to help.
Yeah. Well, again, I've got students who are looking for projects. I think this could very well be a really interesting one. Now that we're talking about technology, obviously technology is changing so rapidly these days. It's hard for all of us to keep up. Um, what ways do you see new technologies helping, other than this one we just talked about, helping, you and your colleagues in administering elections, like processing ballots or doing faster audits? Is there new technology that you're working on in this election cycle, other than, talking about things like using AI to translate ballots?
Yeah, the one that we are piloting in this primary election, and it's not for some counties, it's not something new, but it's going to be new for us, which is using automated signature verification software
Mhm.
through our vendor that supplies our mail sorting machines and other equipment. And so we're not, as part of the pilot, we're not planning on allowing the software to make any final determinations. It'll kind of be running in the background, but we'll still have our same processes where we have trained staff who are reviewing the signatures on every single ballot envelope that's returned. But then our intent is part of the pilot is that after the election to compare the decisions that the software made to the decisions
Mhm.
that our staff made to kind of see how comfortable we are with the accuracy. I know you can set the sensitivity for that software at a certain
Mhm.
percentage to try to so that's something we can kind of get a feel for too as to whether we need to adjust that percentage. This is something we've been looking at since 2023. We've been very methodical and precise about rolling this out. And a lot of what we've done since 2023, other than going to other counties that use it or talking to them on the phone, was also understanding that we needed to improve the resolution quality of the signatures we had in our system. So
Mhm.
that when that software compared a signature on an envelope to what we had in our database, that would be it would be meaningful. There would be value in that. So, we've been spending a lot of time on making sure we're updating, as we accept new signatures, making sure that we're saving those in a higher resolution and
Mhm.
building a better, higher resolution database of voter signatures so that we could have the signature have a better chance of working well.
So when it comes to the resolution of the signatures, are the high resolution images of signatures coming from DMV, and so the lower image ones are coming off of paper? Is that where that problem is
I
coming
would say
from?
the opposite. The lowest
Oh,
resolutions are coming from the DMV.
okay, interesting.
So when the DMV has somebody use one of their beat up,
Mhm.
touchpads to finger sign, those are not high quality signatures.
Okay, okay, that's interesting to know. So while we're sort of talking about some new things and new innovations you're doing, I just thought it'd be kind of fun right now to talk about this new project that we're working on together.
Sure.
It was just announced last week that the Lynn Center at Caltech is getting a grant from MIT's Election Data and Science Lab that's funded by the Election Trust Initiative to, again, go back and building off of some of the collaborations in the past with Orange County to try to develop new metrics and new measures and new models to evaluate the accuracy and quality of the voter registration data in Orange County. So I want to I know we just started this. We literally just had a kickoff meeting
Yep.
yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it was.
So, just in general, like what do you hope to get out of this project and this collaboration?
Well, first, Mike, I want to thank you for developing this idea and this application so that we could get the funding to be able to kind of explore these things. That's a big help to us that you're that good of a partner for us. So, we've worked well together with Caltech over the years, and for some time. But really, in terms of at a minimum level, what I hope to accomplish is the last time that your team did an extensive review of how we maintain our voter file was a report published in 2019.
Hmm.
So I'm starting to get a little pushback when I point to that, like, well, that's pretty dated. How can you really rely on that report as showing that you're doing a good job maintaining your voter file? So at a basic level, updating that's important for the, one, for the messaging that we do about, the care we put into voter file maintenance, but also, you know, my understanding of the report you guys did in 2019 is you identified a way to better identify potential duplicate
Hmm.
records for voters, that now is being used statewide. So, there's an opportunity in this for you guys to identify something that we could do better and recommendations that we could implement. So that's going to be something that I look forward to. And as you know, the other thing we've really talked about is how do we message, what are the performance measures that we should point to show that we have an accurate voter database. And so up until this point, as we've talked, the data points that I have pointed to the public when talking about the daily work we do to maintain our voter file is to look at the percentage of ballots we mail out for every election that are returned to us by the USPS as undeliverable, and to talk about how that percentage, that has ranged between 1.6% to 1.9%, over the last couple of years, how that is regularly better than the statewide average for ballots, and
Hmm.
it's significantly better than the undeliverable mail percentage that the USPS posts for all first-class mail by fiscal year. So, when we're hitting 1.6%, the Postal Service is their undeliverable first-class mail is more than 4%. So, I've been using that as a talking point to point to the work that we do. I also talk about, the counting widget stuff, like how much work is involved. That in 2024, we were making on average 81,000 registration updates a month.
Hmm.
And talking about all the cancellations that we do every year and the work and all that work that we do. Um, the other one measurement we've been recently talking about is the Secretary of State will regularly, like every couple weeks, every month, email all the counties saying, okay, we've compared your records to VoteCal, and each one of you counties has this number of issues that have to be resolved, and differences between the two databases. And we are regularly, one of of the large counties, the one with the lowest percentage usually. I
Hmm.
mean, the last report that they just issued, I know we shared with you, we've got more than 1.9 million voters, and there's 45 records on that the Secretary of State indicated that we have to resolve an issue with. So
Hmm.
that's, 2/1000% of our records need that update. So, my hope is that we continue to work through this, is that maybe another type of performance measure
Hmm.
becomes obvious to your team that we can talk about to reinforce, the good work that we do to keep that database updated regularly, as accurate as possible every day.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the key things that other than obviously our academic research and involving, as many of our students at Caltech as we can in these kind of collaborations, because it's super important for them, right, to see how the work that they do and the expertise that they have can be, of immediate importance and benefit in an important process like this. Um, but to me, one of the things that I'm most excited about is, as we started this project, just, seeing the incredibly wide array of things that you're doing right now, to maintain the voter list, and that I think we're end up being reflected in some of these outcome metrics.
Right.
But I'm really excited to try to look at all of these different tools that you're using, and maybe trying to help identify which ones may be, better at improving the accuracy of the list. And we may not be able to do that, but just trying to see if we can't help identify some of those so that some of your colleagues can adopt some of the same practices that you're doing.
Yeah, and the other thing, there's somewhat of an art, right, to figuring out what's the date you're going to run the voter file for mailing ballots,
Right.
so so that it is as accurate as possible. And I mentioned earlier in this discussion, we had to start a week earlier, which means we're adding a little bit of risk to
Right.
the accuracy because we've already run everybody's addresses. So, we had a discussion today in our planning meeting about, you know, would our vendor have a way for us to sort out anything that after this point, a voter gets canceled so we don't mail a ballot to a canceled voter? Or are we going to have to just rely on hand pulling
Hmm.
voters from the mailing that get canceled? Because the Secretary of State just sent us about 300 cancellations on Monday this week, and
Hmm.
we had already run half the list by that point.
I need to be aware of the time, your time in particular, because I'm asking a lot from you at this important time. So I got three remaining questions.
Sure.
The first, I think, is pretty straightforward. So there's a lot of new election administrators out there. There's a lot of volatility in your field. What's one piece of advice you would give to a new election official?
It's kind of personal because this this field right now, there's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot
Hmm.
of anger in some parts of the community. There's a lot of questioning of what we do. So really, what I have to remind myself, and what I would hope that others are reminded, is I have to remind myself I'm doing something very important and good for the community.
Hmm.
Um, Even if I'm getting criticism, I know that me and my team are doing everything we can to ensure that eligible voters in our county can vote easily, they can vote securely. And so I need to remind myself of that, and not take something, trolls on social media that might say something negative, not take somebody from the community who shows up at a board of supervisors meeting to demand that I be fired, to not take that personally, because I know that we're doing good work. And I can go to sleep well every night knowing that we've done everything we can each day to achieve that. But that's the other kind of like part of it, is that because I can't let that affect me, I also have to remind myself to not only tell myself that, but to do things to take care of myself, to make
Hmm.
sure that I'm carving out time for walks or other kind of exercise, hikes, spending time with family, with my kids, with my wife, making sure that I'm taking care of myself as well. So, and getting enough sleep. I mean, that's in an election, during
Yeah.
election cycle, sleep is very rare commodity to take advantage of. But that's something I've really committed myself this year to do, is to make sure that I get enough sleep.
Hmm. That's great advice in general, just for everyone, not just for other election officials. Something I'm constantly telling my students, right? Make sure they're getting enough sleep. The other question I wanted to ask, and I think we talked about this back last time we talked, but I love the story. Why elections? What got you excited about working in elections? How'd you catch the bug?
Well, it was kind of doing it really to catch the bug. So, as you mentioned, I worked for 20 years for San Diego County, and only the last four was in elections. But everything that I've done during my career, from being a fundraiser to being a newspaper reporter, to all the different jobs that I had at San Bernardino County. I was a chief of staff to two different members of the Board of Supervisors. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat. I was a
Hmm.
marketing director for the county medical center. I was a legislative affairs director for the Board of Supervisors for about 8 months while they were
Hmm.
between hirings. And I was a management analyst for the CEO at San Bernardino County. So, I
Hmm.
feel like every little piece of experience and every bit of information I learned along the way, I think has really helped me be successful in elections. All that stuff that I've learned over the past 40 years, because one of the advantages I think I have is that because I've done so many different things, and because I was a newspaper reporter thinking about what was important to my readers, I was a chief of staff thinking about what was important to my elected official that I was representing, but also what was important to his or her voters. And then working for a CEO, how did I
Hmm.
need to talk to him about what I was working on and what was important to him? So I really feel like that has given me a lot of good experience to think about my audience and to think about why I do what I do and how to talk about it. And so, um, if I look at all the different jobs that I've had over the past 40 years, I think that's what has led me to be successful in this role now, is that communication has been something that has developed over time. And granted, I'm not saying that I was a good communicator 40 years ago. I was not. But trial through error and
Uh,
practice makes you better. So I've gotten to the point now where I feel like I'm better about telling narratives and showing people things rather than just telling them about it and focusing on what the key thing is that's important for them to know.
mhm. Well, it's interesting that communications has come up so much in the last 45 minutes when we've talked. Again, that
Yeah.
has just become such a important part of the role of an election official. Become an important part of my job as well, in a way that it wasn't when I first started. And I'll tell you, Bob, I think you are at the top of the field when it comes to communicating. You're a really fantastic listener, and I think we see that in the report that you all did as part of the VCA. And I think you are really fantastic at getting out there and communicating in all these different ways with your constituents and the many concerns that they have, but the many accolades that they have too for the
Yeah.
experiences that they have voting. So I really want to commend you on that and keep up the good work. And we're happy to help support you in any way that we can.
I appreciate that, Mike.
So in closing, is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
Well, if there are any Orange County voters who are watching this today, we have mailed out ballots to military and overseas voters this week in
Okay.
English. We put the ones in the mail on Monday. We're emailing out links to voters who requested their ballots that way. And we actually have 5 military and overseas voters who want their ballots faxed to them. So we're doing that today.
Hmm.
We will be delivering ballots for this election on Saturday, May 2nd, to the post office for them to start delivering on Monday, May 4th. And bottom line is you're going to have 4 weeks to cast that ballot. The earlier that you cast it, the better chance you have of having your vote included in that first results report that we post at 8:05 on election night. So if you're concerned about the speed of reporting of results and processing ballots in California, vote early. That's the best way to make sure that we're done quickly is if people vote early.
Yeah, I definitely think that's great advice because we know also about some of the issues that are cropping up with the postal service as well,
Yep.
getting things to you all on time. So yeah, vote early, get those ballots in, and it's remarkable to think that there are already people who are voting
Yep.
in this primary election. So it's gosh, it's happened so quickly. So
It's here.
it's happening. People are voting. So, in any case,
Yep.
Bob, thank you so much for your time today. Look forward to working with you on our project, and of course, have a great election.
Hey, thank you so much, Mike, for this opportunity.